You mentioned college, and we were talking about you're hating to network and whatnot. Um, Speaking of college, which it's been for me, what year is it? 2024. So it's been 8 years since I've been to college. It's probably been like six since I've even stepped on a college. Nah, I lied. I went to a couple ECU football games, but like stepped on a college campus for any legitimate purpose. It's been a minute, and the football stadium's kind of like off campus, but that's
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
point. But right now, the biggest thing that's going on is the NCAA tournament, men's and women's. Um, One is a little more interesting than the other, but they are both going on, and DraftKings and like all the gambling is now legal in North Carolina as of a few weeks ago. So of course, like things are really, really picking up. There's a lot of steam. And then of course, NC State, local NC State, Raleigh native NC State, men's and women's are both in the final four. There's a lot to unpack because we can
Mhm.
get to the important stuff. But naturally, the conversation everybody's having, specifically about the women's game, is the stars and how there are finally stars. And like what the NBA has done, and where I actually think they've made a mistake, is NBA is star driven. There's always a face of the league. There's always a few. LeBron, Steph, Kevin Durant have basically been carrying the league, that title of faces of the league, for the last 15 years. Like all of them. Obviously, Steph was really the last 10, but the last 15 years, those three. And the problem is because they have been so marketable that now they're all on their last legs, and the NBA hasn't found that next person.
Right.
Where women's college basketball is changing is that the stars are made in college so that when it can then partner and help the WNBA. So like the last star we had in college as far as men is concerned is probably who Zion, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of these names come in the NCAA tournament, like Ja, like Steph, when they go crazy. And then, but like Kevin Durant 1 year at Texas, but like the stars, like the last one really was Zion. And that's because we knew him while he was in high school because of the videos of him dunking like crazy at 14 years old.
Right,
But
right.
college basketball doesn't produce stars. You already have all the transferring, so you can't even fall in love with a specific team because every year that team is different. It's not like, and I'm a North Carolina Tar Heel fan, and it's not like me watching 2005 they win a championship. 2006 they got four new starters, and they don't win another championship until 2009. But those four new starters from 2006 are now champions in 2009, and they grew and they developed, and it was the same guys. It happened again in 2016. They lost in the championship game. They had a couple seniors, but all those guys, you got top 10 recruits who are staying 3-4 years, and they win in 2017. You don't get
Mm.
that now. You got the old system, which was, Kentucky, they go get all the freshmen.
Right, right.
Carolina, we're gonna get some high recruited players, maybe one that leaves early. A lot of them are gonna stay, and you can actually love the team and love the coach and just like be invested. You can't invest in a guy who either A is gonna go pro after this year or is gonna transfer because he didn't play a lot this year. And in the women's game, one, they already have to stay 3 years. Two, there's not a whole bunch of transferring like that,
Yeah.
and they have stars.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's kind of one of those live by the sword, die by the sword, right? Like, if you are a Kentucky, you love getting these great players in, right? And like you kind of are willing to roll those dice because you're hoping it'll pay off on the court in the short term. But I think if you're looking at the health of the league, of the sport in terms of men's college basketball, like yes, like the one and done rule definitely hurts them to a huge level. Like you mentioned, like it's hard for you to get invested. Like you're getting whiplash, it seems like every year. If you have a whole different team, it play people want to see those players be there over the long term. And I really do think the NFL is in a healthier place because people in the NFL, they may like their players, but they love their teams. Right? Like people don't say I was an Aaron Rodgers fan. They say I'm a Green Bay Packer fan. Right? And
Yep.
they were a Packer fan before Aaron came along, and they'll be a Packer fan long after Aaron's retired, right? And like And if I'm the Packers, like I'm gonna get a lot more money from you as a consumer, and that's not a bad thing. That's just the nature of sports, right? It's a consumption based thing, but I'm gonna get the money from you for a lifetime. If you're a Packers fan, like you grow up in a Packers onesie, and you might, go in a Packers casket if you play your cards right, like that. Like that's the way it is. But um, I kind of went through that just a touch when when my goat Tom Brady left the Patriots, right? Like you kind of have to have for me at least, I had to have a moment of reflection. Like, are you a Patriots fan? Or are you a Tom Brady fan? Right?
Mm.
Like there's a touch of soul searching in that moment to try to figure out like what do you do? And so like that's for a guy who's been there 20 years. But imagine a guy who might be great. He's there for 3 years and he's gone, right? Like as much as I might love that player, like I'm not going to have that same level of attachment. So, I'm thrilled to see the women's game blow up like it has been. It seems in the last, let's say, 2 years. It's really, really accelerated this year. I was fortunate. One of my close friends has season tickets. He's had season tickets for probably 3 or 4 years now to the NC State women's games. And so we go to probably, he'll take me at least to 3 or 4 games a year, and we'll go there. And I had a great time. This is again like going back 3 to 4 years. It's a quality game. Like if you like sports, like if you like athletic competition, like it checks all those boxes. Like you'll get the comments from certain corners of social media that are all just really based in sexism. Let's be honest, like about the game, and they try to say like because they can't dunk and like all this garbage like that, like all that crap. But like, if you want to see a good athletic product, there's no reason to not watch these athletes play. I'm not even going to say these women. I'm going to say these athletes play. So I'm thrilled for them. I think the fact that they're getting these household names, like if you can get to a place where someone walking on the street can name you 5 WNBA players, like you've really moved the needle. Because we can be honest and say that if you want a diehard WNBA fan, you probably couldn't name 5 teams, unfortunately. And that's just the state of where the league was and currently is. And that can go into a whole nother conversation about marketing and the amount of attention it gets both on TV and the media. But I'm hoping that as these college superstars do get to the pros, they can keep that air of importance with them and go to these teams and help elevate them. And it's kind of unfair, really, to ask, let's say 3 women to, hey, make my league important, please. Here's my whole sports league. Make it important for me. Like, it's really not a fair ask, but unfortunately, like if you're gonna be a trailblazer in that regard, like that's kind of just the cross you have to bear, unfortunately. But for them, all they have to do is just keep balling out. Like you don't have to be the second Maya Moore or anybody. Just be the first Caitlin Clark and just ball out. And like if you can do in the pros, which I imagine they'll be able to, like based off the games that I've watched, like I'm not sitting there thinking Cameron Brink can't play in the WNBA. Like I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking, all right, she's gonna go there and be a great player. Like you just have to do that and do your job, and like I said, continue to carry yourself like you did in college. So I'm very interested to see how that happens, because at least in my lifetime, I can't think of a sport league that has gone through the rapid development like this case with women's college basketball. Like I was there for the NASCAR bubble in like the late 90s into the early 2000s, but that was the roller coaster chunking up before the fall off. This is like a forest fire, right? Like it just blew up really quickly. So I think from a sports history perspective, I'm really curious to see what happens with it. I want it to do well. I want the league to do well. Um, I think the more sports you have out there, the better. I think representation is really important. Making sure that the 5 and 6 year olds that see these women play say this is a route for me. That's important. That matters. And like you don't have to be a woman to want representation for these women. I think that's something that any decent person can see and say like, hey, this is something that's good for sports. Like I want this to do well. Now, I'm not saying I'm expecting every basketball fan to have to go and get WNBA season tickets, but you can support, at least don't hold them back, right? Like
Right.
you ain't gotta
Yeah.
push me up, but don't hold me back, right?
Yeah.
And I'm seeing, at least in my circle on the internet, which credit is a very small ripple in the ocean, but I've seen a lot more positive than negative, and I'm really happy for that. I'm very interested in seeing how these next couple days go. Like I mentioned, I've been following this women's NC State team for a while. We got a lot of really good players, and my one dream from college sports perspective is I just want one national championship in my lifetime, right? Like I just need one. And I remember when I was in college, it was a little bit longer than you, not a lot longer, but a little bit longer. And we had the men's team had a Sweet 16 run, and that was great. If any one of your listeners know who Kevin Wood is, like that was our guy. He was that's a deep cut name for for college athletics. If you know who
Yeah.
Kevin Wood is,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a deep cut. Um, but I just wanted one run, and around that time was when Nick Saban, Alabama was super hot, and it seemed like every other year. Like if you were at Alabama for like 5 years at that time, you probably saw 3 championships, right? Like
Right.
you were just
Right.
an embarrassment of riches. And I just remember thinking, if I can just get one, because you see, like the older teams, and you see, the clips, and they're all wonderful, but they're kind of grainy. They're not in HD. They're not recent. So like if I could just get one in my lifetime. Now if the greatest entity, the creator of the universe is listening to me right now and gives me a men's and a women's championship, I'm good forever, bro. Like I'm good till the sun blows up after that. Like in the same year, like you couldn't tell me anything. You kidding me? So but I just want one, and I'm just really, really proud of the team. Like I said, both the men's and the women's. I'm more surprised by the men's team success than the women's, to be honest. Just based on what I see now, I fully admit, like I'm not gonna sit on here and pretend like I watched every single game of every single basketball team, but like from the games that I did watch, I was like, okay, the men's state team is probably not long for the tournament, right? Like, and we saw what happened with the ACC tournament. Like, they had to shock the world just to get a bid. And I mean, but to their credit, they did it, right? Like, if you've done the impossible, like you can't take that away. So, I'm really proud of the effort they've done. Like the coaching, the staff, DJ Burns is a star, like an absolute star. I love watching his game. I love his attitude, his energy off the court as well. But man, if we could just get this one, boy, I tell you what, like I said, I'm good. I'm
I'm
good.
gonna I'm gonna go ahead and let you know to maybe temper your hopes just a little bit, because South Carolina is a pretty tall task for these girls. Even though I think that NC State continues to be I thought that them not being ranked to start the season was like the ultimate sign of disrespect. They always end up somehow being in the Final Four, at least the Elite Eight every year. I just don't know why they don't just get some of that respect cash in. And they lose some people, but they got anyway, that's neither here nor there. You talked about kind of the types of fans, and I do think that they're not really fans. It's the people who all they want to do because they're women and they're not men already. Boom, right there. Just wanna shit on it, right? Then you
Yep.
got the fan who actually do want to come out here and see the Kyrie Irving, see the alley oops. This is what I call the social media fan. So the fan who wants to come, like who doesn't need to watch a game of actual basketball, just needs to see the highlights and they'll be perfectly fine. This is where the Sports Center top 10 was geared to that fan, right?
Yep.
But they're not real fans of basketball. When you have people who are fans of basketball, that's when all because the women's game actually, in my opinion, is a little bit more technical. It's less about
Yes.
one-on-one. It's more
Yeah.
about footwork. It's more about positioning. It's more about ball movement. It's more
It's more of
about
a
the
team
spin run.
game.
It absolutely. It is fast paced. They can all shoot. I think it's quite frankly, when it comes to them versus the men's game, I think it's better basketball, truthfully. So for people who like the sport of basketball, they're enjoying it. Then, of course, you add on the fact that there's Caitlin Clark, who is a Steph Curry esque figure. Maya Moore was great. Maya Moore was, in my opinion, I'm going to give her because she's the greatest basketball player I had ever seen up to that point.
Right.
Um, Diana Taurasi was my favorite basketball player in college. She was great. They weren't shooting. They weren't doing the thing that all of us at this day and age want to do, which is shoot threes from 40 feet, right? And you
Yeah.
got Caitlin Clark who came in right as Steph Curry is exiting, right in the NBA, and she's shooting these threes. And it's that draft class. It's the 2020. Like we can point to Caitlin Clark, but it's the Paige Bueckers, and she 2 years ago was someone who I was paying attention to when she won National Player of the Year as a freshman.
Right.
She was one I was paying attention to. Angel Reese, of course, and then the ratings with the Iowa LSU, which some of those ratings, some of those viewers watching was also rooted in a little bit of racism, but it's
Yeah.
okay. Because regardless, the stars, and then on top of that, the women's game is set up where the stars do shine. Rarely do you don't have a game where LeBron scores 8 points in game 4 against the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals. Like you don't have that. Caitlin Clark shows out, Angel Reese shows out, Paige Bueckers shows out. Like they all show out every time. So you know that okay, if I tune in to watch this game, nobody's sitting for because they want load management, and
Right.
they're all gonna play pretty well, and those girls are all well rounded. They're not just a shooter or just a rebounder or just a shot blocker, or like they do all types of stuff, which in turn makes the game as a whole better because the best players do a lot. Um so I think what also helps is this NIL. I don't know if um, people realize because now with this NIL, and so now you see Caitlin Clark in commercials, right? So like
Mhm.
you don't have to only see her if you're watching women's basketball to see her, and someone's gonna say, "Yo, who is that?" Right? Someone's
Right.
gonna and then they see these, and like you see Caitlin Clark all over the place, but couldn't do that 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, you weren't gonna see Caitlin Clark unless you turned on Iowa women's basketball. And let's be honest,
You had to
who
be in
was
the
thinking
trenches.
anything about Iowa women's basketball 5 years ago? You hear,
Right.
"Oh, UConn won another championship." It got to the point where it was like, "Oh, they four-peated, okay." Like, we just knew that was a part of the news cycle, UConn wins again, but it wasn't, whatever. You got now, and we don't even live in Iowa. I can't imagine what the local stuff is when it comes to
Right.
Caitlin Clark. But, so that NIL stuff is allowing this, like you talked about, this, like, this forest fire to just, like, fly up in flames because you're going from there's a little bit of popularity. Remember they even like 2020 guy like NBA players were trying to pop up the WNBA games with the
Yeah.
orange
I remember I think Kobe
uh
was the first player I remember seeing going to WNBA games.
Yep.
Remember
Devin
that?
Booker
Yeah.
showed up in his and I've actually got that WNBA hoodie. Mine's a little too big. They run big. Just if anybody who's going to order one, they run big. Probably should get a size lower than you expect. But yeah, it was a whole thing that clearly the men were trying to shed some light, and little did we know, all it took was some NIL and one recruiting class, and now everyone's locked in. I mean, it broke records. 12.3 million. Iowa LSU. Followed up with a great game with USC and UConn. Juju Watkins, who's a freshman, she'll be here for 2 more years at least. We got her. It's just, it's a good time, man, for women's college basketball. But my fear is that if the WNBA doesn't take this seriously, there's going to be like, I don't want another ABA situation. And if you're not
Yeah.
familiar, I don't know all of the ins and outs, but the basic premise is the ABA saw that the NBA maybe couldn't pay some players, wasn't as popular. This is back in like the 70s, 80s, something like that. So they created another league, the ABA. So,
Right.
when
Yep.
you hear people say things like since the merger, that's what we're talking about because the ABA said, well, we'll pay you. And then good players. So when you hear, oh, the WNBA, the first pick in the draft, Aaliyah Boston, she makes less money per year than I do
Right.
for her rookie contract. Less money. This is why the Brittany Grinders go overseas to play in Russia because they'll actually make
They'll get money.
millions of
They'll get
dollars
paid. Yeah.
in the off season versus being over here and it's like they work a 9 to 5, flying commercial. Like so, but if you don't start to take this seriously, it only takes one person who's got a lot of money to say, maybe I want to make another live golf situation and
Yeah.
grab girls to come play over here because they're going to get paid more. And all you need is three of the stars and just good basketball. And the next thing you know, the WNBA is tripping. So the WNBA and the NBA need to partner together and figure out how to get this before an ABA situation happens again. Because if they get in like that, get in the weeds that way, it could be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is gonna come down to TV. Like, I think it all comes down to TV exposure, you know? How many times have you seen a WNBA game on ESPN, on TNT, NBC, ABC, CBS? Like, not very often, right? Like, in your lifetime. I'm sure you could probably count them on your fingers. So, if I'm the WNBA and the NBA, I'm going to these channels and these networks, and I'm saying, "Look, you gotta put us on." Like, I don't care if it's just every Wednesday night, like Wednesday, Thursday, like during a dead, air quotes, dead time of the week, but we gotta get TV time because that's the only way you're gonna get people to care. If they're on TNT and like Shaq and Kenny are talking about them, people are gonna care. People are gonna listen. But if they're no on ESPN 8, like, no one cares about that, right? So and social media can only carry you so far. So yeah, I think that's really in my opinion, that's what it's gonna come down to. And I'm hoping that, like you said, like they take it seriously. I feel like they have to though, because there was already, some small chatter. I remember not that long ago about the WNBA getting folded, right? Because people were like, it's not making money, it's not really worth it. Like, and again, a lot of that is language may have been coded with a sexism against women's basketball, which is a real thing. It exists. Like, I'm not gonna sit and pretend like it doesn't exist. I see it on the timeline all the time. But I think those fears have to be taken seriously. And I mean, realistically, if you're a sports league that's struggling, this is kind of your best case scenario, right? Like, you really couldn't ask for more than this to get multiple star level players joining your league that are young, they're talented, they're going to be around for a long time in your best case scenario. So you have to strike now because you may not get another shot at this, And I'm not trying to be dramatic and be like Caitlin Clark has to save the WNBA or anything, but like, yeah, if they go off and if they're playing in Italy in 2 years, when's the next one gonna come? They may never come, right? Like, there's no guarantee for that. And I mean, never mind the fact that she's a special talent in her own right from an athletic game. Like you said, like she's the closest thing I think we've seen to Steph Curry since Steph Curry, right? Like, you think they're gonna come around every year? You think every 5 years, another girl's gonna come
Right.
around like that? Like, you can't, set your watch by that.
Yep.
So I agree with you. I think it's something they have to take very seriously, and I'm really hopeful that they will, because I do want that league to grow. And if you're a fan of sports, you love the story, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, sports is entertainment, and it's all about the stories. If you're the undefeated big bad Patriots against the underdog Giants, like, that's a story. David and Goliath story, like, everyone knows that kind of story. Or if you're in NASCAR, one of the greatest drivers ever, Dale Earnhardt, spent 20 years trying to win the biggest race. He's won everything else in the sport, 7 championships, could never win the biggest race of the year. On his 20th try, he got it. Like, that's a story of struggle and coming back to the well and failing and finally succeeding. You can relate to. And like, just because it's a women's game doesn't mean those stories aren't there. And like, that's to me is what's most interesting about sports in general. Is just that kind of struggle. So if you like that part of sports, if you care about the athleticism combined with the emotions of it, well, this is more of what you like. Like, if you really just want dunks, I mean, slam ball existed back in the day with the trampolines. Like, if we want to be honest, like, you could go make that league and they dunk all day long. But are we gonna say that's the purest, most honorable version of the sport of basketball? Probably not, right? So I just think if you love sports, I'm not saying you're obligated to like women's game, of course you're not, but it has all the makings of the things that to me a sports fan would like. And that's one reason why I'm so passionate about it being successful, because I think it's exactly what you would want more of. No one's sitting around saying, "Oh man, I've had enough good sports."
Right.
No
Right.
one who's ever said that. Like, I want more stories. I want more athletes and teams and coaches that I care about. I want rivalries, but that can only grow if it's on my TV.
Yep.
It can't grow on my timeline necessarily. It can start on my timeline, but I can't only be exposed to it through, a 60-second clip, or a TikTok. Like, they can only get you so far. So I agree. I hope it goes well. Like, I would love to see then be a bit more creative in terms of like the marketing of the sport. I just feel like if I had a whole sports league to market, like this, but I'm sure the listeners don't, but like that's my background was marketing. Like that's my profession. If I had a whole sports league to market, do you know how creative we could get? Like you have so many levers you could pull from.
Yeah.
And there's so many different things you could do in terms of being creative. Yes, on social, but you could have, I'd have billboards in every major city with these people on them, like there's just so much. Like I would have Caitlin Clark on every freaking bus in the city that she got drafted on, like every single one. Like, there's just so much you can do. And I feel like they probably have rested on their laurels and kind of just figured, well, this is what we are as a league, and we're content to that. And that may have affected them, and that may have been what caused them to wither. This is pure speculation now, but this should be the thing that lights the fire under you as leadership, as team owners, as executives to say, hey, if nothing else, we can make a boatload of money. And if
Yep.
anything should motivate you, it's making a boatload. Like, go ask the people that got those TV ratings how much they care about the women's game right now. Ask them about those ads that they've got paid for. They care about the women's game a lot. So if you want to make some money, you should
Yeah.
probably take this seriously. If nothing else, never mind, the moral, the fan side of it. If nothing else for your bottom, because I know if nothing else, your bottom line exists. Do it for the
Right.
money.
Yeah. That's it'll be interesting because like you mentioned, they gotta add TV time. I think TV deals are a huge deal. And that's NFL makes a lot of money off of TV deals. And like you
Mhm.
said, look, like it's also difficult because the WNBA and the NBA take place at two different times. So like it's
Yeah.
hard to get that to you. Like if the WNBA, because the season's a little shorter, if the WNBA playoffs and the NBA playoffs happened at the same time, but in alternating kind of ways, the way that the tournaments do, college basketball tournaments, you might be able to do something